it's going off. My BS detector's going off again, but this time it's about the layoffs, the AI layoffs. Because lately, there have been a lot of layoffs. Coinbase lays off 700 people. Snap, about 1,000. Wix, another 1,000. Cloudflare, 1,100. Atlassian, 1,600. Block lays off 4,000, which is nearly half their entire workforce. And there are so many more where that came from. And they all have one thing in common. They are saying these layoffs are due to AI. Cloudflare says they are restructuring for the agentic AI era. Oracle, when talking about laying off 21,000 people over the past 12 months, says it's due to adoption and deployment of AI technologies across our operations and warned more cuts could be coming. They're all saying the same thing. These layoffs aren't because our numbers are bad. They're not because we overhired during the pandemic. No, nothing is wrong. Actually, these are good layoffs because we are being more efficient with AI than ever before, so we don't need all of these people. But aren't they sure about that? Because I've looked at the numbers. I've read the filings. I've seen the memos and heard of what all of these folks are saying, but the story doesn't seem to hold up. And real quick, in the event any company wants to try to come after me because they don't like what I'm saying in this video, I need to make a disclaimer. I don't actually know whether the layoffs are because of AI or not because of AI. Because you can say it's AI, but it's an unfalsifiable claim, so there's no way for anyone to actually know. However, if it walks like a duck and it talks like a duck, and trust me, I know ducks, then it's probably a dang duck. So I think it's time we start looking for some ducks, all right? And we're going to start off with Block, after a word from today's sponsor. So all the case studies I'm going over today, they all have something in common. The stories don't add up. It's like somebody is not paying attention to the details and they just all slip through the cracks. But you know what doesn't need to slip through the cracks? Bugs in your code base. As long as you're using Macroscope to review your code like I am on every single pull request that comes through the code base. Out of the box, it has correctness checks, which is exactly what it sounds like. It checks to see if that PR, if that code is correct, which this PR wasn't. You can see it found 2 bugs, flagged them, and actually I had it fix it for me. With just this simple little comment right here, it implemented a fix, committed it, pushed it to this PR, and then once the checks passed, it automatically merged it into the PR. But something I've really been liking lately are Macroscope's check run agents. You can see I have a few of them here. One down here just follows the principles of this repo and uses all of the parameters that I set. And you can see that in action on this PR, where I'm implementing more advanced analytics for this project, and it found a few bugs, which I'll need it to fix, but it also created this architecture diagram right here, as you see. And it does a lot more than review code. I don't have time to talk about all of it today, but it has been one of my favorite tools to use lately. If you want to learn more about it, try it out. $100 and free usage credits. Click the link in the top of the description or just go to jetty.to/macroscope so they know I sent you. I'd really appreciate it. Back to the video. So let's start off with Block. This is Jack Dorsey's company. Block is a company that owns Square, it owns Cash App, it owns a handful of other companies as well. So it's not small. It's pretty big actually. Earlier this year, it had 10,000 employees until February, where they laid off 4,000 of them. And in their shareholder letter announcing these layoffs, which is this all lowercase tweet, Jack says, "We're not making this decision because we're in trouble. Our business is strong. Gross profit continues to grow. We continue to serve more and more customers and profitability is improving. But something has changed. We're already seeing that the intelligence tools we're creating and using, paired with smaller and flatter teams, are enabling a new way of working which fundamentally changes what it means to build and run a company. And that's accelerating rapidly." Now, I'm not going to sit here and pretend the underlying idea is crazy. I mean, I've said something similar to where what used to take 5 developers before without AI could now be done with 2 developers or 3 developers with AI. So the sentiment, I understand what he's trying to portray, but it's not the whole story. Because if we look at the numbers, and I know a lot of people like to point out the $1.3 billion in net income in 2025, which is way down from the $2.9 billion that it was in 2024. But when looking at the real health of a company, you want to look at gross profit, not the net income, because, well, in terms of taxes, you want the net income to be the smallest number possible so you pay as little in taxes as possible. So I think they did some accounting work where they were able to eliminate over half of the taxes that they were paying the year prior. But when looking at the gross profit, we see that it grew 15% in 2025 to over $10 billion. And they raised their 2026 guidance. And they announced a $5 billion buyback. So needless to say, they're not hurting for money. That's not the driving factor, at least, of these layoffs. But here's something that wasn't mentioned. Block nearly tripled their headcount during the pandemic. And it's because they had all of this free money. A lot of companies took advantage of central banks slashing interest rates to nearly 0%, which they did in order to prevent an entire economic collapse, to be fair. But again, basically free money. And then Block's stock was popping off at a roughly $100 billion market cap. So they just threw all of this excess cash at the company to grow it, to potentially build out products, to hire 8,000 new employees, growing their headcount from 4,000 to 12,000. But just as fast as their stock went up, it came right on back down, dropping by roughly 70%. So by the end of 2022, they now have triple their headcount, 12,000 employees, but the stock is valued at the same amount it was before the pandemic, and they don't have all the free money because interest rates are creeping back up. That's understating it. The central banks actually aggressively increased interest rates throughout 2022. So don't let me understate this. It is pretty amazing how Block didn't do heavy layoffs in 2023, like basically every other company reacting to this. They did, over the course of a couple years, shrink from 12,000 employees to 10,000 employees. But then in the beginning of 2026 is when this crazy 4,000 employee layoff happened. So after the company massively overhired, the market punished them. They don't have this free money anymore. They try to make it work, but now what they're doing is trying to say that the reason for these massive layoffs are because AI is so dang good, and that they're so good at using it that they can suddenly cut 40% of their entire workforce. I'm not buying it. Do I need to get my BS detector back out again, the good old GameCube? It's just that with all of these other variables, it's not that believable. Like I said, I'm not buying it, and neither are the analysts. For example, this analyst told the Wall Street Journal the vast majority of these cuts were probably not because of AI. And then FT Partners told Bloomberg it was more about the business being bloated for years. But why would you lie about the reason for these layoffs? Well, maybe this chart will help us understand. With this news, the stock jumped up by 25% in an hour, which added about $6 billion to the market cap. Now, I'm not saying that's why they had AI be the reason for these layoffs, but I don't know. I'm also not saying AI had nothing to do with these layoffs, but it being the entire reason for 40% of your entire workforce like that, I don't think so. And as I mentioned and laid out, Block is not the only company doing this. They just happen to be the biggest. And when I say biggest, I mean biggest. I mean they set a record for the largest percentage-based layoff in the entire S&P 500. So good job, Block. You're making history. But Snap is another example, and Snap is a great example. I love this one. They've actually been making the rounds these past few weeks because Evan, the CEO of Snap, just revealed specs. They're AR glasses that look like this, big and beautiful. And actually, these specs have something to do with the layoffs, coincidentally. But let's take it back a couple months to April of 2026. Snap announced a layoff of 1,000 employees. And Evan Spiegel, the CEO, said it's because they have a new way of working. Same as what Jack said, basically. Smaller teams are moving faster than ever with AI, so we don't need these other people. So they got rid of them, And would you look at that? A 7% stock bump on the news. It's not much, but note it didn't drop on the news. It did drop on the release of the specs and the announcement of all that, but that's neither here nor there. It didn't drop on the news, which layoffs are typically not a good thing and not a good indicator. So it's a bit odd to see all of these AI layoff announcements and occurrences popping the stock instead of dropping the stock. And real quick, when it comes to the specs, I gotta be honest here. Yes, they're big and bulky and not very user-friendly in terms of how they're bending over Evan's ears, but I am seemingly one of the only people that think that AR glasses are going to be much more commonplace in the future than most others think. These companies just have to have the full capabilities that we all want, but in a form factor that feels like actual glasses for mass adoption to occur. And they're trending in the right direction, and they're not there yet, but as they get there, I think AR glasses are going to be incredibly useful. But that's a whole other video if I ever decide to really share my full opinion on that. But back to the layoff announcement. Frankly, I don't really care what the stock does in this story. I want to talk about what happened 2 weeks before these layoffs. An investment firm called Irenic Capital, which is very notably an activist investor, meaning their whole job is to buy stock in companies and then pressure those companies into doing their bidding. Activism, well, they took a 2.5% position in Snap and promptly sent the CEO a public letter. It's actually a whole website, savesnapnow.com. And we gotta read this, all right? So they call them out, saying Snap has spent more than $3.5 billion on specs and is spending $500 million in cash annually. At this point, if specs cannot be funded on its own, it is time to shut it down. And then they tell them to use AI to improve ad monetization and a handful of other things. But what I want to talk about is this: rationalize the cost structure. They say Snap had roughly 3,000 employees before COVID. It has over 5,200 today. Like many of your peers, you overhired. Well, that sounds familiar. It's almost like we've been saying this whole time. But you know what? Let's just keep reading. Unlike your peers, you haven't course corrected. Meta's year of efficiency led to a reduction of 25% of the workforce and increased EBITDA margins by nearly 20 percentage points. And Block recently announced a 40% headcount reduction by adopting AI to drive efficiencies. And the way I read that last sentence, what the investment firm is saying is that you overhired, you need to fire, and you need to figure out a way to utilize AI to increase efficiency so you can still do everything you're doing now, besides the specs, but with less people. Or say that you're laying off all of these people thanks to AI efficiency. However you want to read it, whether they're saying you actually got to figure it out or you got to use this as an excuse, I'm going to leave that up to you. But regardless of what you think, would you look at that? Just 2 weeks after this letter, Snap lays off 1,000 people, attributing it to AI efficiency. So either Snap is the most efficient company I have ever seen, heeding the advice of this major investor and figuring out a way to replace 1,000 people, 16% of its entire workforce, with AI in only 2 weeks. Or they just happen to be a company with a sinking stock, an angry investor that said that they have to do some layoffs, that explicitly noted that Snap overhired during the pandemic and has yet to course correct and should trim the fat in the same way Block did, and then Snap complied and then used the best reason that they had at their disposal, AI. But again, you tell me. I hate how I have to step around all of these things, because something I find fascinating with these AI layoffs is that these companies don't actually have to prove anything. And there's no way for me, an outsider, to prove anything, given they don't have to prove anything, because there's actually no way to check it. Because when a company says they cut 4,000 people because of AI, There's nobody going in and auditing the company to see exactly how AI is overtaking these people's jobs or the tasks that these people are performing, or if these cuts were going to happen regardless of AI. It's an unfalsifiable claim, which makes it a very easy reason to reach for. And even more so, I've seen companies claim not that AI is doing the work, but that AI is going to do the work. So they really don't have to prove anything because they're saying something is happening in the future. And this is what raises the biggest red flag to me, because I feel like AI is at a place where if you know what you're doing, it can help you be more efficient. It can help you be more productive. And what I mean by that, as a dev, not going in and vibe code one shot looping a giant project all at once, but instead you have AI complete your tasks per your spec and format and standards and everything that you have laid out for any new team member, human team member that would come on your dev team, and rules that they need to follow. Your AI follows, you review, and you move on from there. So you don't have to manually write all the code. We're in 2026. I'm still explaining this to so many people, so I feel the need to actually elaborate on how one could use AI to be more efficient. Whatever. But it's been at this level for 6 or 7 months since Opus 4.5 was released, since Codex 5.3 was also released. Those were the real turning point into kind of where we are in 2026 compared to a year ago, because it is quite a bit different, at least from a developer's perspective. So really what I'm saying is I'm not sure why these companies who are saying AI is going to do this work, not that it's already doing this work, I'm not sure why they're so confident in their ability to outsource all of this work to AI or to one of their employees with AI in the future if they haven't already figured it out by now. I don't know. I think it's just because it's the easiest scapegoat for them, even more so than saying AI is doing their job, which again, they don't have to prove, but they don't even have to prove anything if they say AI is going to do their job because it hasn't even happened yet. But at the same time, if you aren't hurting for money, all of these companies are saying we are doing awesome in terms of revenue and money and gross profit and this, that, and the other. If that's the case, why are you laying off half of your workforce instead of just growing the rest of your company? And that's a genuine question because there are sometimes reasons for that. But all of these companies are full on growth mode. They want to deploy as much cash as possible, as we saw during the pandemic, and grow. So if AI can really increase your abilities, why are you trying to lean out and do the same amount of work instead of growing and doing even more work? Because apparently you can afford it. Like you said, your numbers are great. Whatever. I think it's about time we dive into some of the real reasons why I think these AI layoffs are happening. I've alluded to a handful so far, but I really need to dive into them. Like one, overhiring during the pandemic. This one is actually a noted reason for layoffs in 2023. Mark Zuckerberg, for example, stated that they're performing layoffs because he messed up. Meta hired way too many people during the pandemic and now we have to lean out, which I can actually respect that. Be straightforward and honest in your reasoning. You messed up, you overhired, so now you have to perform some layoffs. For some reason, these companies operated in a way where they had so much money and they threw it around as much as they possibly could, expecting that this would last forever for some reason, until it didn't. Leading to 2023, which is the biggest layoff year since we've been tracking it of all time, in tech at least. And then there were some more layoffs in 2024, 2025. Layoffs aren't necessarily a new thing, but they've been more common since the overhiring through the pandemic. But there's something else that we want to match up next to the layoffs, and that is AI. ChatGPT was released at the end of 2022. That's when LLMs hit the mainstream. It was a very cool novelty. It could generate some code, generate some text. Was it really that useful? No, but it showed the world what was possible. And some of us, maybe not most of us, saw that in the coming years, this is going to improve, most likely, and maybe get pretty good. But in 2023, it was not It could not do any sort of meaningful work, so therefore, there was no way that any of these companies could blame AI for the layoffs in 2023. And then in 2024, maybe a couple did. Customer service rules, things like that. 2025, there were some more overhiring layoffs. But for some reason, once 2026 happened, it's not because of overhiring anymore. Now that AI is better than ever and it can actually help developers on a more consistent basis to be more efficient and to, in some cases, write better code. I know that's going to be a controversial statement, but in some cases, now they're all of a sudden pointing the finger at AI saying that's the reason for these layoffs. But here's the problem with that. Developers like you and I, we are quite literally trained to recognize patterns. And there was a pattern consistently of layoffs for overhiring, layoffs from overhiring, layoffs from overhiring. But all of a sudden, now that there's a clean and easy scapegoat that sounds good to investors, it's AI that is causing the overhiring with absolutely no mention of overhiring, which is an important note that I want to make. Is that I'm not saying that AI has nothing to do with it. I'm not saying using AI could help you do the work of what used to take 2 to 3 people. What I'm saying is that now all of these layoffs are attributed to AI, and none of them are attributed to overhiring or bad numbers or defending the margin or any of the common reasons that layoffs have always occurred. So there's something that goes off in all of our brains that call BS because the pattern doesn't match. But there's also another reason for these layoffs, and that is because of AI. Wait a minute. Oh, yes, not because AI is taking the jobs. Actually, you know what? I'm going to go as far as saying AI actually is the reason for a lot of these layoffs. But not in the way you think. I'm not talking about AI is taking your job. I'm talking about these companies are building out AI infrastructure and performing AI research. Meta, for example, sent out a memo in April of 2026 stating cuts are meant to help offset investments into other areas like AI. And then just a month later in May, laid off 8,000 people and also moved 7,000 people into AI roles. And their capital spending this year is going to $125 to $145 billion, up from $72 billion. So they're potentially doubling their capital spending, and that money's got to come from somewhere. And Oracle's doing something similar. Like I said, they officially announced the reason for 21,000 people being laid off over the past 12 months was cited as AI. And in another report, they said they needed to free up $8 to $10 billion in cash to fund a $50 billion AI data center build out, which also means they're taking on tens of billions of dollars in new debt. So yes, there are verifiable layoffs caused by AI, but the verifiable ones are for AI research, are for AI infrastructure and build outs, where a lot of the cases they're just reallocating budget from one department and moving them over to the AI department. And when it comes to whether or not these layoffs are due to AI, don't take my word for it. We actually have some data. There was a survey done in December of 2025 of 1,000 US hiring managers. These are the people that actually handle layoffs. And 59% of them, most of them admitted that these companies lean on AI as the reasoning for layoffs because it plays better. It plays better with investors. It plays better with the press. And some claimed it played better with the public. I don't know what public they're talking about. We're saying AI is replacing you is the better play, but this is what they said. But that's not all of them. There was a whopping 9% that said AI did fully replace these positions. So you have 59% saying their company is lying about AI being the reason, and then 9% saying that no, AI is actually the reason. I don't know. One number there is quite a bit bigger than the other number. I'm just saying. And I do want to acknowledge that survey, again, was done in 2025. AI now is quite a bit more useful and better than it was last year. However, people aren't. If they're willing to lie about the reason last year, then they're also willing to lie about the reason this year. And why lie, you ask? Money. A normal layoff announcement tells the market that there is weak demand for what you offer. But when you express that these layoffs are because you're increasing efficiency while cutting costs, well, that's a good sign to investors. So really, with a lot of these companies, it's to hell with honesty. We just got to ask ourselves, do we want our stock to go up or do we want our stock to go down? I think a lot of companies caught wind of this, which is why in January, only 7% of these cuts were AI cited, whereas by May, there were 40%. Now, there is one case study that blows a hole or two in my premise, and that is Cloudflare. And although their CEO made the best AI layoff argument that I've seen, it still doesn't quite hold up. So Cloudflare laid off 1,100 people, which is roughly 20% of their entire workforce. The CEO made an entire blog post all about it, but in addition to that, he also wrote this entire op-ed in the Wall Street Journal titled "How I Choose Which Cloudflare Employees to Replace with AI." And I think that title allows for no misunderstanding here. These layoffs are to replace employees with AI. His words, not mine. And he lays it all out for us. He splits his employees into 3 groups: builders, sellers, and measurers, which is a concept off Drucker's 1954 management book called The Practice of Management. And he said the vast majority of those laid off were measurers. And why? Because AI is really good at doing the measuring now. But when we look at what falls into that category, per the book, it's finance, legal, audit, compliance, and middle management, which historically has been the most common layoff target in business. So I'm not convinced these layoffs wouldn't have happened even without AI. But at the same time, Matthew lays out exactly how these jobs are to be replaced. That is, AI can do the tasks, not replace the entire job. Or in other words, the employees that are still there are going to utilize AI to do the tasks that the laid off people used to do. And actually, if you read this paragraph right here, you'll see that what they're describing is effectively just textbook examples of removing bloat in the company that could otherwise be automated or is just simply redundant. And you know how I said this case study blew a hole in my premise? Well, that's because on this announcement of the layoffs, the stock actually dropped by 20% instead of going up like the previous case studies. And now the stock has since recovered. But what's interesting is that these layoffs were announced the same day as earnings. And when you make an announcement like this on earnings, it's because you're trying to hedge against the earnings report. And if you look at the earnings report, look, they recorded record revenue of $640 million, which is up 34%, and they're cash flow positive. Both good things, right? Well, the same filing also shows a GAAP operating loss of $62 million and a GAAP net loss of about $23 million. And most importantly, their margins were shrinking, down about 130 basis points year over year. And what's the oldest trick in the book to defending a margin? Cutting bloat. Layoffs. And what did we just say was the most common target for layoffs in business? Back office, middle management measurers. And that is why I believe the stock still dropped, because based on the financials, it was almost certainly going to drop regardless of this announcement. And I believe why they announced these AI layoffs on the same day as earnings was to try to soften the blow. Oh yeah, and I wanted to also mention that in that same op-ed, Matthew also said that he wants to hire as many engineers in sales as possible. So the layoff really just sounds like a textbook example of defending the margin by cutting bloat and reallocating any of that budget that you have to another department to hire more engineers, which I think is a great strategy, by the way. Just reorganizing the company to run better. That's good. And hiring more engineers is also good. I just don't like how it's wrapped, because how it actually sounds is that instead of AI being the primary factor or even the only factor like they're claiming, it's more of a secondary factor and a selling point. What they're saying now is we're laying these people off because AI can do their job, or because AI can do their tasks. But really, it seems more like we need to cut bloat, so let's do that, and then maybe we can try to figure out how everyone else can utilize AI to do their tasks. I don't think I'm crazy in that conclusion, am I? Maybe, but what about all of these tech CEOs that are also saying most of these other CEOs are lying about attributing these layoffs to AI? Jensen Huang, the CEO of NVIDIA, is one of them. He really changed his tune on AI. He went from kids shouldn't learn how to code because of AI, and AI is going to take your jobs, to now calling the AI layoff narrative lazy, saying that CEOs are just trying to sound smart and appease investors, but know that these layoffs are not due to AI, and that he really hates that we're scaring people, and he calls all of this irresponsible. And then you have Demis Hassabis, the CEO of Google DeepMind, saying the same thing, that companies are using AI as an excuse for layoffs they wanted to do anyway. And he says maybe it's to attract investor money. Oh yeah, and let's not forget about Sam Altman, who in February said that there's some AI washing where people are blaming AI for layoffs that they would otherwise do. And then in May, he doubled down with, I'm delighted to be wrong about this, but I don't think we're going to have the kind of jobs apocalypse that some of the companies in our space advocate. Now, I will say, even though all of this supports my viewpoint and that there may be truth in what they're saying, I don't think they're saying it for the same reason that I'm saying it. They're doing damage control right now, because when the public believes that AI is coming for all of your jobs, there's going to be backlash. There's going to be a lot of protests to AI data centers being built near them. And it's also going to invite government regulation, as we saw with Anthropic and Mythos. So while I think what they're saying is true, that AI is not the real reason for most of these layoffs, they are saying it for a completely different reason. I do have to say one thing though, and that is AI is real. I can't sit here and earnestly say that AI is never going to take any jobs, that it can't make you more efficient, that it can't do any meaningful work, because it can. And it does. For example, I have a buddy who owns a dev shop where basically they build software on contract. And he's always ran a team of roughly 4 or 5 developers. So a small business. It's not like one of these giant companies that we've been talking about. But what's interesting is now what they're able to do is the work of what he says should have taken 15 to 20 developers many years ago. But now that the 4 or 5 developers on his team are utilizing AI, they're able to get way more work done. I don't think anybody disputes that. So while layoffs didn't happen in his company, there's still software, there's still contracts being allocated to a team of 4 or 5 that previously would have provided jobs for 15 or 20. And this is just one example. I'm sure that is happening at a lot of other companies as well. So with all of that said, and I didn't even go over everything, I cut a lot out and skipped over quite a bit, here's where I am with all of this. Some of these companies are using AI as a flat out scapegoat for these layoffs. They would have done these layoffs anyway, whether it's due to overhiring or financials cutting the bloat, defending the margin, angry investors. They would have done these layoffs anyway, but they found a good, easy reason that is actually positive to investors and their stock in AI. Other companies are simply overstating it. AI may be a part of the reason for these layoffs, but not the reason for these layoffs. And definitely not the only reason for these layoffs. And then some of the headlines lead to a bit of a misunderstanding, where they say AI is the reason for these layoffs, when in reality, it's because the budget is being reallocated and claimed by AI. But AI research and AI infrastructure, not because AI is doing their jobs, as these headlines would want you to believe. But I don't see a single one of these companies doing what they implied, or sometimes outright stated. AI coming in and doing these jobs outright. And I do want to say, if you are a CEO watching this video, there's something that you have to keep in mind. That if you are considering falsely attributing AI as the reason for your layoffs, or even accurately and honestly attributing AI as the reason for your layoffs, you're going to be held to a higher standard than everyone else. The second you say that you don't need all of these employees, you don't need these developers, you don't need these engineers, you don't need them because AI can do their job for them and maybe even better, every single outage that you have, every single bug that you have, every single issue is going to be amplified more than ever before. And that's because you're a case study. You're saying AI can do all of these jobs, but yet you're still having all of these issues. And frankly, nobody cares when you do something right. They really just focus on when you do something wrong, and especially when you position it in a way that it's AI's fault, which is exactly what you're doing when you fire a bunch of people and saying AI is doing their job instead. And that's all I have for you today. Now, there's really only one thing to do, and that's sit back and see how everything plays out. We'll see if they do what 2024 and 2025 AI layoffs did, where they started rehiring after they realized that it was a mistake, like Klarna and like Atlassian, when they announced that they're an AI first company and laid off 1,600 people right after they hired 2,000 people and still have about 14% more people than last year, and then started hiring a lot of other people after the cuts, which they're a case study that I kind of cut out because I just have no idea what Atlassian's talking about. AI first company layoffs, but the layoffs are less than what you just hired, and then you continue to go on a severe hiring spree. None of it really makes any sense, but whatever. I'm going to have to take my BS detector here and put it back on the charger because it's been going off a lot lately, and I have a feeling that it's going to continue to do so in the future. But for now, I need a break. Y'all take it easy. I'll see you in the next one.